Good morning, everyone. We're glad that you are here. See if everybody is in. Just checking on you all, make sure you're here. Okay, great. Um, we are glad that you are here today. We want to thank you for spending your time with us as we go through this. Today, we are talking about the 35M intervention list, and we are looking at a program called Story Champ. And so I just want to go over a couple of things with you. So over the past 2 weeks, we have been working with vendors that have been identified on the 35M intervention list to offer webinars that provide an overview of their products and services. Today, you'll have the opportunity to learn more about StoryChamp during this 1-hour session. At the end of the week, once all sessions have concluded, we will share webinar recordings and information shared by the vendor. If you'd like earlier access, please feel free to visit our grant website at grants.risa.net. Under the 35M section, you'll find updated recording lists and vendor materials as soon as they become available. It's taking us about 48 hours to get everything edited and ready to go. So those should be there. The Monday one should be there, I'm guessing today. So with that, I do want to let you know, the Q&A is not enabled right now, but you absolutely can ask any questions you need to in the chat button. It will come directly to myself and to our presenter to answer. And you can find that feature on your toolbar. So I do want to let you know that Wayne Risa does not endorse any specific providers. These webinars are being offered as a service to our constituents to make informed decisions about the 35M grant spending. For questions that you have about specific products, please feel free to contact the vendors directly. If you are a Wayne County district or school and would like to support in identifying instructional needs or developing a plan for purchasing and adopting materials, we invite you to reach out to one of our Wayne Risa literacy consultants. And with that, I am going to turn this over to our presenter for the day, and that is Megan Kirby.
Wonderful. All right. I think it should be sharing.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. All right. So, hi, good morning, almost afternoon, everybody. My name is Megan Kirby, and I'm going to take you through information about Story Champs and how it fits in as an intervention. So you can make an informed decision about whether or not this is a good fit for your school or program specifically. I do have on here the email address for us in general. It'll be either myself or Christy Jones, who's featured right here. We answer that email, so you got that there. I am the Director of Dissemination and Implementation Programs for Language Dynamics Group. That's the publisher of Story Champs, the program. And so I can help you with implementation questions. If you want to talk about money and pricing, I can also handle that. I have no problems. And then we also have other resources that you can get. Our website is also available at languagedynamicsgroup.com, but it can be a little bit overwhelming because we have other products, of course, besides the intervention that are on there. I do want to give a shout out to the developers, the researchers of Story Champs. That would be Dr. Trina Spencer and Dr. Doug Peterson. They are at separate universities. Trina is at KU and runs the Juniper Gardens Children's Project. If you've ever heard about the 30 million word gap, that's research from Betty Hart and Todd Risley that came out of Juniper Gardens. Really cool things going on there. So she continues to work there and continue to do research that also includes work with Story Champs. And then Doug is at University of Wyoming, and I believe switching to Baylor University soon, next year maybe. And so you can also reach out. You'll see them publish research. I still continue to do research myself with them on our interventions, but they have tons of other publications that have to do with language comprehension and assessment and intervention. So today I'm going to talk about structured literacy intervention for language comprehension. So it's going to be the other 50%. I would even argue more than that, like maybe like 75% of what goes into reading comprehension. That is the comprehension side. And that's what Story Champs is going to address. So when you look at this is a modified, or what I like to say is improved upon Scarborough's rope, because I like colors, but also it goes into depth about how the rope itself and what goes into reading comprehension is extremely complicated, right? So you have the decoding parts that are at the bottom of the rope represented by greens and blues. And then you've got language comprehension, which is the upper strands of Scarborough's rope, which is your oranges, pinks, purples. And so you need both of these strategically to build towards reading comprehension. Unfortunately, what happens is that most of our resources and time is spent in teaching word recognition skills because they're easier to assess. So you don't know that you're not teaching something if you aren't assessing it, right? And so that's kind of what we have across the world. In fact, Trina and Doug are in Australia right now doing more trainings with speech pathologists about Story Champs intervention, specifically for these upper strands. So I like to break things down if I'm going to explain what the importance of oral language is or language comprehension, and then that goes straight into Story Champs. At a basic level, why are we where we are right now, right? So where we have at least 1 out of 3 students, I would even say probably less, are reading at a proficient level in the US, and that's at a 4th grade assessment. So the National Assessment of Educational Progress says approximately, 66% of our students are not reading at a proficient level. And that's kind of where we have to go into what do we do about it? And what is the problem right now? And here it is. When we start at school, and I was formerly a kindergarten teacher, special ed collab, and we're asked and tasked as teachers to jump in to teaching reading and writing. And unfortunately, we're not given resources that would work on immediately and early listening and speaking. So what happens is as you're adding floors, let's say, or furniture to your house, and your foundation is not strong, we all know what happens. So adding the floors or adding furniture and think the weight of the house becomes more and more like that magnitude. Think of that as the more complex reading gets across the grade levels, right? So we're talking about not just word reading anymore. We're talking about not just answering WH questions, but you're given a passage that's nonfiction and you're asked to infer the meaning of these words or this passage or make sense of it. And you have no idea where to begin. Well, that's really when things start to break down about 3rd grade and we see referrals for speech language impairments or speech language disorders or specific learning impairments or disabilities. We see those referrals coming about 2nd and 3rd grade. And that's why, is because that's when it becomes most apparent that we didn't really shore up listening and speaking early on. So you need all of these skills. You need language to be able to comprehend what it is you read. So it's fine to read words, but you need to be able to comprehend what it is that you just read, right? And then access to these slides will be available. I have provided them to Carrie, so that will be shared with you. All right, so I'm putting this up here just because I'm going to go into it. OSERS in 2015, based on some Supreme Court cases that came down in decisions, really put an emphasis on we need to make sure that our students with disabilities or who are at risk receiving intervention have these still same high expectations to be able to meet, or really what their IEP or 504, anything, really any intervention plan, even with RTI, it needs to be aligned with the intent to get that student to be able to work towards their grade level expectations, right? So the goals we would write would help them kind of close that gap. It's not that they're going to be able to meet these, but I think it's very important for us to show you kind of how Story Champs aligns with these grade level expectations so that we are in compliance, special educator over here, with this, what's being tasked, to us is like, we have to know the standards and what are we working towards. So for the first standard, the literary elements, we look at these things Literature, key details and ideas. This is just kindergarten. So by the end of kindergarten, what is it that our students have to be able to do? A lot of these will say, with drawing, dictating, writing, with guidance and support from adults, prompting and support. So that's developmentally appropriate. I do want to put that in there. But we cover all of these things. There are Story Champs lesson plans for all of these items for the small group and one-to-one lessons, as well as the large group, which we'll get into. So if you have like 5 or more students, you would use this large group format for your intervention lessons. So this is even first grade, right? In Michigan, these are the standards for ELA, and this is what is covered by Story Champs here. So I'm not going to read through all of these. I'm going to kind of click through them so we can spend more time getting into what Story Champs intervention is and what you get with the kit. But please know that we have done our due diligence to make sure that we are in compliance with holding up high expectations for our students who are receiving intervention as well. So that's 3rd grade, and then we'll stop there for a minute. Okay, so in essence, Story Champs is going to be just like a kit, right? So you're going to get a box like yay big, and within that box is going to be a whole bunch of stuff that I'm showing right here. And you're going to see things like manipulatives and materials, popsicle sticks, and I'll go over those icons. There's a storybook. So I'm going to start first with the scope and sequence and how that's relevant to you as an interventionist or to your teachers and staff. And then I'm going to go over, one of the key ingredients of Story Champs and why it works and all the research behind why it works is, we've got these effective teaching principles and the lesson plans. Then we've got materials like the storybook that includes these carefully constructed stories for the purpose of teaching language comprehension. And then visual supports, which we know works, and having activities for students. So there's active student learning, right? So the scope and sequence, we call it a quick start guide instead of scope and sequence, but you'll see them there from pre-K through grade 3. They're available to try to align, right, with those standards, but we provide information at the bottom for students in intervention. So the way you would look at something like this, I'm going to use preschool as an example right now to orient you to this visual, is that on the page itself, this would be the scope of skills that are covered by Story Champs lesson plans and materials. And at the bottom would be the sequence in which you would deliver instruction. Now, if you have students receiving intervention in preschool, this would be our recommendation and not rule governed. It'd be our recommendation for implementing Story Champs lessons for students at risk or identified for intervention. So cycle 1, imagine that as fall. Cycle 2 would be spring, fall, winter, spring. So cycle 1, fall, cycle 2, winter, cycle 3, spring. We use the term cycle because this is used across the world. So like in Australia and New Zealand, where it's used, our seasons are different. So if we look at this right here, language skill would be low. So that would be our at-risk, our intervention students. If I have a small group intervention, or I might have one-to-one, here's my recommendation for the master lesson plans. That's what MLP stands for. And here are the specific number for the lesson plans that you would pull to teach basic story structure. And you would use level A classic stories. Right? So that's kind of what this goes into on how to interpret it. We've got the same for kindergarten, where basically the scope of all the things that need to be taught. And then for intervention, the sequence of using all of these lesson plans to make sure that you're teaching all of those things that need to be taught, right? To try to keep kids from falling too far behind from their grade level peers. Similarly, we've got it for first grade and second grade and third grade. And obviously by third grade, so this is where we're trying to keep kids on or as close as possible to those grade level standards. In 4th and above, and Story Champs is used through high school. I eventually ended up teaching adults with significant impairments from their disabilities. So significant communication difficulties. We were trying to teach them how to advocate for themselves and tell personal stories. So obviously we use Story Champs with them, but once you hit 4th grade, there are no more grade level standards that are going to talk about discourse structure and language comprehension at these levels. It's really a pre-K through grade 3 gen ed kind of standard. And then it becomes, this is going to be intervention for all of the other grades if they can't do it by now. So that's kind of why it stops there. So when I'm working with students in 4th and 5th grade, right, I am not going to use this as an end all be all. I'm going to use it as a guide for where I can start, because I can figure out what's the instructional level of my student. Maybe I'm working with students who are really developmentally in terms of academics on a kindergarten level. Well, I could just go to that kindergarten quick start guide. None of our lesson plans have an actual grade listed on them. Okay. So that's and that's on purpose. All right. Any questions thus far? Okay. All right. So this right here is just a brief overview of all the physical materials that we're going to have in our kit. I'm going to go through each of these and kind of just take note. I can bring it out of the box, but it's probably easier just to see it on the screen right here. So the first item that is important or integral to the kit is going to be the storybook. And so it's a physical copy of the storybook, and it's yay big. Right. And if you've got the bilingual, there's a Spanish-English bilingual kit. So for instruction in Spanish and instruction in English, it's like a 2-for-1. You would also receive a separate storybook that would be green and would have the same stories translated by native Spanish speakers and then reverse translated. So this key ingredient is going to be required for most of the lesson plans that you're going to be working with. Okay, so they're going to require the use of the storybook. The stories are going to all have their own illustrations. There's going to be stories written at different levels of complexity, and I'll go into those a little bit more in depth in the next slide. But this is a primary ingredient. So there are different levels, like I was talking about before, where stories were written. This is the same story about, let's say, Michelle's miserable teeth. Well, if I am teaching students a very basic skill of, listening to a story and being able to retell that story with the key parts. Okay, so a beginning, middle, and end, or what we would like to say is a problem, an action, or attempt to solve a problem, and then the consequence. That's really what a beginning, middle, and end is. Those are the key parts that make a story. And if you don't have those in your retell, you didn't tell me a story, right? And that's the basis for all other skills that are built upon for language comprehension. If I don't know what it is that you just told me, I don't really care about the vocabulary you're using. I don't care whether you're using because or so that, or some of these causal and temporal subordinate clauses. I need to be able to understand what it is that you're saying first and help you create a schema to organize information so that you can be able to communicate it to others, right? How to answer WH questions. So initially, I would have a story, and what we do is we read it to the students. They never see these. These are not written to be decodable, right? This is an intervention specifically for language comprehension. There are plenty of things already on the market that work and that are research-based for decoding and phonics. So we are not trying to tackle that. There does not exist things for language comprehension. So I'd read it, and then I would have the students practice doing a retell with a bunch of activities, as you'll see. And then over time, as students develop their proficiency in being able to retell or tell a story, a personal story with, the key parts, then write stories, whether they're fictional or personal, write retells, then we really start looking at the complexity of the language that they're using. They have the parts, the key parts that make a story, but now we need to make it more interesting. And we do that by using a different level in the storybook. Our lesson plan would tell us what level to go to in the storybook, though. We're not supposed to remember all of these things. So here's an example of how then we would work on something like adverbial or subordinate clauses. This is complex academic language that needs to be taught explicitly to our students receiving intervention. So it's not through osmosis and just being in the classroom that they're learning these things. In fact, research has shown a lot of what we say, about 1 out of every 5 sentences, maybe every 4 sentences, includes some kind of complex academic linguistic feature. So adverbial or subordinate clause. That's spoken. Now in a science textbook, and this is not a surprise probably to most of us, it's 1 out of every 3 sentences will contain one of these things. So if you don't have any intervention, or we're not specifically targeting this through explicit structured literacy instruction for language comprehension, your student is missing 1 out of every 3 things that the teacher is saying. or maybe 4 things, and then definitely 1 out of every 3 sentences that they're reading from the book. So they're not accessing instruction, right? And so this is why we would write stories that would explicitly contain these features so that they can learn to use them and learn what they are for, because they need to be exposed to them more explicitly. So for example, we teach temporal subordinate clauses. So we call them temporal connections. And we also teach causal connections, right? So the first example, the other day, Daniel was working at his desk because his teacher told him to write an amazing story. So if I asked a follow-up question, well, why was he working at his desk? They would answer because they know why the word because exists and the function of it. It's to answer why questions, right? Or how. Now, when questions are super helpful, when we teach students to recognize or answer those WH questions, it's because they've built up proficiency in answering them orally first, right? So by exposing students to sentences or stories that have these sentences embedded within them, they're being exposed to more and more temporal subordinate clauses, words like after, when, before, as, while, until. Those are the key ones that we see in academic language within the school setting. So that same story would have a sentence that would say, when a boy marched by his desk, he unintentionally spilled water on Daniel's paper, right? So when did Daniel's paper get ruined? You go and look through, like eventually students learn, oh, if I look for these words in my text, or if I listen for them, I'll be able to answer these questions and better understand what it is that I'm reading or listening to, right? So level C stories, for example, in that storybook, all of those stories are written explicitly for focus stimulation on causal connections or causal subordinate clauses. So this story right here, you'll see a lot of bolded words because and so that there are a lot of exemplars for our students to hear, right? We also use an icon, a visual stimulus that we eventually fade out to help students remember to use or to recognize when they are used some of these complex linguistic features, these connection words. We also teach temporal connections explicitly when we've got a lesson plan that calls for level D story. So all the stories in this level D section of the storybook have embedded temporal connections and multiple exemplars of them. So the students are receiving more input, listening to stories that have more of these words. They're thus more likely to use them and practice use of them and understand them. That generalizes them to other activities in their day, right? And that's kind of the whole purpose of using Story Champs, is not just to learn it within the context of these stories. Now, Story Champs also addresses elaborated noun phrases. So those are targets that are going to appear in our pre-written stories. Again, focus stimulation. And we first look at single elements that appear immediately before a noun or a verb, right? So adjectives, we call these sparkle words. So they're going to give sparkle to whatever they are elaborating upon or enhancing, whatever they're modifying. So the other day, Daniel was occupied writing at his desk because his teacher told him to write an amazing story. So not just any story, but an amazing story. And over time, we look at adding adverbs. Now, use of these sparkle icons have been generalized for use in nonfiction or context, right? So in science and history, we have teachers that are using them and generalizing them to get students to recognize and use noun verb modifiers from nonfiction passages too. So just providing you an example. Over time, we also then start doing the double adjectives that appear immediately before a noun, right? So the level E stories are when we introduce these modifiers and we're having students practice retelling and telling stories using modifiers in addition to a complete episode. And we have them embedded with complex linguistic features like these adjectives and adverbs and double adjectives in front of a noun. So you can see here all of the bolded words that would be featured and highlighted in this particular story that we'd be using for a lesson. Okay. So then we have story illustrations. Those come in their own box within the Story Champs kit, but there's 24 individual sets that go with these 24 stories that are written at different levels, but they match the story, and they're actually designed specifically to not have too much color so that it's not distracting or take away from listening to the stories. Also, it helps with, you can change the name to be more culturally relevant of the character, the main character in the story. And so then we're not tying that to any particular culture, skin color, race, ethnicity that would be assigned to or associated with a picture, right? So there's research that goes into that. Story icons. These are wonderful. You might have seen variations of these on Teachers Pay Teachers. We will not sue them, but it's copyright infringement because it works. That's really, it's like flattery of like, these things work. And we know they work when you pair them with explicit teaching procedures. So we have story grammar icons. These represent the parts of a story. They help students both retell and tell and write complete episodes, stories with complete episodes. Then we also have icons, right, for these complex linguistic features like the causal and temporal subordinate clauses or causal and temporal connections, and then modifiers or sparkle words, those noun and verb modifiers. You'll also see that comes in the kit are these icons, and these right here with the clouds and this star with a plus sign like a battery, those specifically will go for lesson plans that address nonfiction retell, so expository retell, oral, and then also written retells specific to nonfiction or information passages. So our lesson plans for that would call for the use of these. In addition to the story illustrations, there are a pack of these stories. There is a pack of these story starter cards. It's quite cute, funny. They're really meant to spark creativity and elicit students' imagination when they're learning to generate a fictional story. So they need some help. They can't just arbitrarily write a story about, you know, a shark and a whale. Some kids need actually more than that to get going, especially for writing, but also oral retell, oral fictional generation. So that's what these are used for. And again, a lesson plan would call for them so you would know exactly when to use these. Now, the physical materials are available both like, here, where is it? Okay, excuse me, are available both physically, right, as well as digitally. So the storybook is the only thing that would only be available as a physical item. It is not available via PDF. We all know what happens when you've got things available digitally. But we do have the icons, the story illustrations, as well as story starter cards and like graphic organizers. All of those items are available so that you can use a smartboard or interactive whiteboard in your classroom or a laptop to be able to project those if physical materials are not your thing. We also have story, excuse me, I'm gonna go over this. Champs checks, there's peer mediated instruction. So if I have a group of, let's say, 5 students in my intervention group, and I'm working on a lesson plan, that's a lot of students, and all of our lesson plans should be able to be delivered within 20, 25 minutes. I err in 25 minutes when you're faking it till you make it, right? You're new to Story Champs and you have to keep looking at the lesson plan. That's us as an adult, but proficient users, interventionists, find it takes anywhere between 15 and 20 minutes to deliver any lesson plan. And that's because when you've got 5 or more students, we ask you to engage them in peer tutoring rather than asking every single student to tell you the story or whatever the task is when we've got these small group activities. By small group, I mean 2 to 4 students. In reality, that's like utopia, right? But in reality, you're most likely going to have groups of sometimes 5 or 6 students. And in that case, you would use these large group lesson plans for your intervention groups. Now, these small groups, so the 2 to 4 students in a group, those lesson plans are going to call for use of story games. And that might be the story sticks. You would basically hold up a stick that corresponds to the part of the story that's being told, right? Or a story die. I am a student and I would turn, so there's no rolling, but I would turn it's almost like Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's our 6-sided die. You would turn it so that the side with the icon that corresponds to the part of the story that's just being told is facing up, right? And then we've got story icon bingo. There's also the availability for us to play a game called Story Gestures. The fact that gestures are used, research goes into tons of research, but not in the field of academics, more on dementia, Alzheimer's, and interventions to help with short-term memory. Gestures are awesome. They do that. So imagine yourself out on a playground and the kid is all snotty, right? And student comes up to you and you're like, they're hyperventilating. You don't know what they're saying, right? This is, by the way, language comprehension. They need these skills. They need to be able to tell their own story, to advocate for themselves, to get help, right? But in a lot of cases, many of our students who require intervention in these areas cannot tell a complete, coherent and cohesive story. And then I can't help them, and I want to as an adult. So if I were on that playground, I could be like, sorry, so who were you with? And what just happened? Right? And what did you do? So those are all gestures that are associated with Story Champs lessons, but they are generalizable. Gestures are free and portable, right? And that's really where this works wonders, and an ability to be able to be used outside of Story Champs lessons as well. So like I said, there's lots and lots of other materials that are going to be found in what's called digital downloads that anybody who has the kit has access to. We recommend people just download the zip folder and, store it on our school's drive. And we'll kind of see a little bit more about these, but the lesson plans are there, graphic organizers, the manual, take-home activities, and I'll have time to show you that, as well as things like Spot the Sparkle posters for vocabulary instruction and so on. So I will end up showing you those at the very end of our webinar today. So in essence, I'm going to go over the basic teaching procedures, but in essence, our stories are written so that they have themes that are relevant or relatable for students. Most students have experienced the problems that the characters in the story have experienced, or they will at some point in their life. For example, being at a friend's house or at a birthday party and getting, food that you don't want to eat, right? So, or not getting what you want, or being told to wait. Some of these universal themes. And then approximately when we start off, they're between 100 and 130 words in length. So they are very brief when we start, and we get students to build up their discourse or narrative discourse structure. And then we write stories so that they have the primary ingredients, so that there's not a lot of story noise, is what we call it. So the vocabulary, if they're not ready to learn tier 2 vocabulary, tier 3 vocabulary, the stories are written without those words, right? So that they can just focus on the task at hand, which might be just retell the story with 5 parts. We also include visual supports every time we run a lesson, and that might be 5 or 8 illustrations, depending on the length of the story across those multiple levels in the storybook. And then the story grammar icons that would be assigned to go with that story at that particular level. Now, we use these materials with 1 out of the 65 different lesson plans that we would have. Okay? And so the lesson plans are written to be generalizable across stories. So they're basically, think of them as a task analysis or a checklist of teaching procedures that are effective, that work for no matter what story that you're going to use. So for small group intervention, these are the the lesson plans start at number 23, because all of the lesson plans 22 and earlier are for large group formats. And like I said, if you have 5 or more students, you'd use the large group format to be able to deliver intervention within the same time frame it would take you for 2 to 4 students. And so we've got all of these, and they're also available. The same targets are available with individual one-to-one lesson plans as well. So if I have a group of 2 students today and one of them's absent, I can just go to my lesson plans and pull the exact same target, but now my teaching procedures are designed for just a one-to-one intervention. And similarly, if I add students to my group and I had small group, I can then find the exact matching title. And now I have 5 students, I can go find the exact title for a large group lesson plan and not need to differentiate, like change or adapt the lessons. The lessons are done and written for the interventionist, which is what makes Story Champs even more efficient and effective. So there are 5 key characteristics of explicit instruction that are embedded into these master lesson plans. They give the teaching procedures more impact and value, right? So the characteristics are going to include whole part, whole instruction. Teresa Ukrainians is a great researcher in that area of, like, you teach in context, you teach the whole, the reason why we're learning something, and then I'm going to break it down into the part that I'm trying to teach the explicit instruction in, and then I'm going to bring it back together and we're going to review why that skill matters in the grand context and scheme of things. So then we've got multiple exemplar training. We've got fading visual supports, individualized prompting and correction procedures that are embedded within each of the lesson plans, and then obviously active student engagement in some shape or form based on the number of students in your group. Now, I'm going to show you an example of a small group lesson. This one would be working on, I believe it's vocabulary, and there's prompting of the vocabulary, but not necessarily like stopping and then, kind of staying with a kid if they make a mistake. Think of this, right, as an errorless teaching program. All right, so we want students to practice and they end up learning more when the consequence is reinforcement, when they get things right, and we help them versus, nope, that's not it, try again. So we're going to watch this together, and I want you to see there are different capacities or capabilities, of each child in this group. All of them are English language learners, and they're all in first grade. Okay.
Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to tell you a story about Tammy. It's called A Different Spot for the Tent. Listen carefully. There might be some new words in there, some words that you don't know yet, okay? Last weekend, Tammy was camping in the forest. Tammy is our character. There she is. Tammy's our character, and she was camping in the forest. Tammy's dad asked her to help set up the tent. When she dragged the tent to the spot, she accidentally scratched her ankle on some thorn bushes. That's her problem. Look at that. See her little scratch right there? She scratched her ankle. That's a problem. Tammy was sad because her ankle hurt. That's her feeling. Look at her face. She's sad. Tammy told her dad about the thorns. He said, let's find a different spot because this one has dangerous thorns all over it. And that's her action. All right. Her talking to her dad and her dad saying, let's move it. That's the action. That's what they do to solve the problem. Then they set up the tent in a different place. And that's the ending.
So right now, what you can see is that Trina, the whole part is that I'm going to read a story, and then I'll teach you the parts of a story within the context of the storytelling itself. So Trina was putting down the actual visual icons that represent character, problem, feeling, action, ending, right? Without spending time and wasting time, actually, teaching those individually in isolation, we know that that doesn't work from research. So it's embedded and contextualized in the context of this story.
They're such nice listeners. All of you were sitting tall, listening big. Smell. All right, so you remember in this picture right here, Tammy's dad Tammy and her dad moved the tent to a different spot because there were dangerous thorn bushes. See those thorn bushes? They're dangerous. Say dangerous with me. Dangerous. All right, very good. All right. Dangerous means not safe. Say not safe with me. Ready? Yeah. Not safe. Okay, let's have everybody do it together. Ready? Not safe. Better. Okay, what does dangerous mean? Not safe. That's right. That's what dangerous means. Okay.
There are explicit procedures. This is the add-on lesson plan 58, but there are specific procedures for teaching explicit vocabulary instruction, basically, right? So she is not trying to teach them to infer the meaning of something like dangerous. She's explicitly teaching the word, its definition, and getting them to say it. Then she goes on to read the rest of the story, and there's another word that would be the target, right? So she'll stop, she'll say, let's all say that word together, right? Here's the definition, let's repeat the definition, and then what does that word mean? And then they provide it and you keep going. Now, the rest of the lesson plan, once you introduce those the target words that you're going to target within that story, the rest of the lesson plan is going to say, okay, well, let's have students practice retelling that entire story together. So let's see here.
Okay, all right, guess what? Now it's Zulai's turn to tell the story all by herself, and we are going to play this game, okay, called Story Cubes. This is how we play, all right? When she tells the story, hold it still, please. When she tells this story, when she tells this part of the story, we've got to find the character. All right. When she tells this part, we've got to find the problem and so on. Okay. You ready to go?
She was camping and she crashed herself.
That's right. Who was it though? Who was our character? Who was our character? Do you remember her name? It's Tammy. Say Tammy was camping.
Tammy was camping and she scratched herself.
Okay, that's good. That's the problem. Did you guys see the problem? She's got scratched because what was she doing with the tent? Use that word, drag. Oh, with the tent, she was dragging the tent. Very good. And then got scratched. Excellent. You know, did you get the problem?
Okay.
Go ahead. Hold on a second. It's Zulai's turn. Zulai, tell us this part of the story.
She fell sad.
Okay.
And she told her dad to help her. And she found and he found another way to say
So can you use our new word dangerous? Do you remember what was dangerous?
dangerous.
Yeah, say the thorns were dangerous.
The thorns are dangerous.
Very good. And so then what happened in the very end?
She, her, she had another one.
That's right. They moved the tent to a different spot, right? You say that.
She had one moved to a different spot.
Way to go.
These are all in teaching procedures, by the way. So Trina, as the researcher and developer, you're not seeing her reference them, but you can understand why I say, like, when you have the lesson plan and you're learning how to use this, it would be very explicitly provided to you of what to say. Things are scripted, as well as when to do certain things, when to prompt. We use prompting and correction procedures, and all of those are on these lesson plans. So in general, how you would go about doing the intervention for small group is we model the story, provide the context, right? And we put out the icons, and then we explain what the icons are and tie it back into the content of the story that we just told. Then we engage in that team retell, where everybody is going to get a part of the story and be assigned to it. And then they tell parts of the story together, and then I'm going to put it back together again. So, because it's probably a hot mess. And I want them to hear a cohesive and coherent story, right? All the way through. Here's a QR code. If you want to see example of teaching procedures in small group, you can go ahead and scan that, and you'll have more time and to do that on your own. Now, other parts of the lesson plan include, and this is key, this is what sets apart what we're already doing in the classroom, like why what we're doing isn't working as educators. So we've been told to read books and ask questions, but it's actually the fact that students, every student, no matter how many students in your group, will always have the opportunity to take a turn in retelling the entire story. Okay, so what you just saw on the Zulai on the previous video is she went all the way through, and Trina was helping her. The other students were playing a story game, right? Now, the next student that would go, and we didn't get the chance to see that, but you would see it in that little QR code. Now, the next student, we'd take away the visuals or flip them over because you can't see through them. And that student, we would help. So I was going to need help. We'd help them retell the story, but they got the icons. And then the third and fourth students in our group would retell without visual supports, right? But I'm helping them. And by the way, you've heard the story so many times. If you're that third or fourth student and you're getting the teacher's help, pretty good. So it goes relatively quickly. That lesson plan and these steps, you would just use a different story every day, right? So again, you're given explicit teaching procedures that work with whatever storybook. And if you find some storybook at the library, kudos to you, that would match with, exactly only teaching exactly what you needed to teach. So getting rid of story noise. You could technically use this lesson plan with those. And we encourage generalization of the lesson plans across other materials once students get in the habit and practice with the Story Champ stories. So there are just key features with all of this. Individualized prompting allows for differentiation, and the materials are explicitly provided to you at the top. Okay. Now, we also have lesson plans and tons of research behind both of these, small group and large group, and actually also in one-to-one. Key features of this would be for students that really need more explicit instruction. And so just doing small group isn't enough for them to make progress or gains in demonstrating comprehension of language at the discourse, right? The structure of discourse structure or sentence or word, right? And so this learner, as we'll see, will have increased opportunities to respond, to be questioned, to retell, for prompting and correction procedures, and then active participation as a whole, right? So here's the same lesson plan. This is a student, and I'm going to go through it really. I might fast forward a little bit. You can also find this on the demonstrations on our website, or you can email me if you would just want me to send you the link to this. But this is Stuart. Stuart doesn't know Trina. Trina doesn't know Stuart. first time, and it's a little loud at the beginning. I apologize, but they're in an outpatient clinic. And the mom will be there. I don't think you can hear her crying, but he's never done this. And everybody said he couldn't do it. So I'm going to show this to you as a student with autism or autistic student. And here we go. Right. So she's this is the storybook. She is reading the story now. She's reading it. She's putting down the icons on the illustrations as they correspond to the parts of the story. Okay. Now she goes through all of them. And then she's going to tell him what these icons meant. Whoops.
Again, we're not able to hear this audio.
It's too low. All right. So if you want, you can send me an email and I will send this to you. All right, let's try this one too. Let's see. And you tell me, Carrie, if you can hear this one. That.
It's really, really low. We're having a hard time hearing it.
Okay, it's whatever the Zoom's sharing. So in this particular one, what happens is you learn as a student, you learn how to retell a story step by step and with fading visual supports, right? And always with interventionist help. And then you can take a break. So if I have a student who needs a break, they've got token reinforcement systems or whatever, you can take a break between the task of learning to retell and then also learning to tell a personal story. And this is the end all be all. If I have done it, my job as an interventionist, it's that I gave the student the ability to go ahead and tell someone their own story to get help or just for social interaction and engagement, right? And so there are steps in the lesson plan for how to use sticky notes and create illustrations based on what the student's going to tell you. I'm not going to spoil anything here, but when students are learning to tell their own stories, they sound eerily similar to the story that was worked on for the retell. And that is developmentally expected for many, many lessons. It's when there's authentics, or the student connects with the theme of the story that they actually might tell an actual personal story and we can tell. But otherwise, because the stories have these themes that are extremely relatable, we're not creating any false memories. All right. So like I said before, there's, all of these different skills that we could be working on and working towards. And by the time we get to teaching advanced story structure, we have built both the ability to retell a story with key parts, and we've grown those parts. We've also had students learn how to retell or tell stories using complex academic language features at the sentence level or the word level, like vocabulary. And then we put all of those together, and then we teach students, and this is kind of like what, by the end of third grade, by the end of second or third grade, really, students should be able to do this per grade level curriculum standards, is retell a story that has a double episode, in which the first episode to solve the problem doesn't work, right? So the character has to do something else, and then that works, and then there's a resolution. So this is super important because by the time we get to here, most of the storybooks that we would have been using or reading to students are written at this or worse. Like they have too many episodes in them, which is why students aren't really learning language comprehension and able to retell a story in coherent manner in sequence, is because it has too many things, right? Too many episodes. And so really it's once you learn all those other things that we get to hear, and then the stories are written with those double episode and not triple. And they have complex linguistic features in them, like causal, temporal, subordinate clauses, and noun verb modifiers, like those sparkle words. And also tier 2 words, also ways to teach students how to infer the meaning of some of these words that are in this gray bold. We have lesson plans for that. Now, there are over 5 studies that we have that show how strengthening oral language in kindergarten, first grade through intervention or tier 1, whatever, leads to improvements in just text generation skills. So that's writing. So that's just how do we use speaking to teach writing? So not the writing conventions. It's almost like how do you teach reading comprehension without being able to read words? and that's exactly through oral storytelling. So it's the same. We have lesson plans for explicit intervention, explicit instruction in writing, and all of those are there. We also have graphic organizers and tools that help with the pre-writing development planning process. So students can draw their own stories depending on where they are in writing conventions and fine motor skills. Obviously the icons are going to generalize towards this activity. We also have graphic organizers or writing organizers that go with specific levels of the storybook that we've been practicing with our lesson plans, so the students know what these icons mean, and then they can plan their writing, practice doing the rough draft writing, final draft, and then writing checks, right? So SRSD. We love Steve Graham. So what we have here, those are all there. We also have these lesson plans where you can use, this is from the digital presentation. So if I've got a whiteboard or I want to use my computer, I would click on any one of these. Unless I clicked on this dinosaur image, this would come up, right? And I can show the icons or not based on what kind of level are we working at. So students right here, they're only working on, generating a story with 5 parts. So I don't want to show them other icons. And I would follow this lesson plan, and it calls for use of this, and students, I would help them generate a fictional story and walk them through the whole writing process. Oh, and there's the story starter cards that match it. Now we also have ways to extend our lessons, and those come in the form of center activities. So that could be additional practice with story structure. They're student-directed activities, sequencing, illustrations. I always say, like, don't let them touch your own illustrations in your box. We have picture sequencing activities and cards that you can print out and download that they can have access to. Story strips are like comic book strips for story generation or retell, writing organizers, word journals. We also have these really popular Spot the Sparkle posters. And those are included because they give additional attention to and practice with targeted vocabulary words within a story. So if I was using a lesson plan that was targeting tier 2 vocabulary words, and adjacent was one of the words that appeared in the story, I could print out this poster that I put up in my classroom, and anytime the students heard the word adjacent or any of the synonyms that are come in the upper right hand corner here, they would write their name and they put tally marks across the day or the week, right? And we'd be looking at having them practice being more aware or alert and listening out for looking for tier 2 vocabulary. So it's generalizing the skills beyond our Story Champs lessons. We also have what's called Blitz Word Journal, but this is for use with tier 2 vocabulary. And so you would really look at morphological awareness, and you'd be looking at kind of teaching some of the Latin roots, right? And so I would be able to look at having students come up with their own definitions, looking at different shades of meaning between words. So polysemous words are words that have multiple meanings. The word bat, even, it seems like it would be a tier 1 word, but actually, it may not be. It could be an animal or it could be a thing. You could be at bat, which is a whole different thing. When we think about the word ground, that has 32 different meanings in the English language. So just throwing that out there, that we know this as Story Champs researchers and interventionists and developers. And so we have purposely programmed specific words in there to allow students to have more practice with them. And we would also encourage them to write sentences. We include ways for you to work on information writing lessons. We have information writing organizers to provide a framework for transferring what they learn through oral language through stories. So we establish discourse knowledge, the structure of language using stories first, because they're easier medium to access. Everybody tells stories. They hear stories everywhere. And then the more difficult types of discourse patterns that appear in expository or information passages, there's 6. So you've got instructional, informational, cause effect, how to, some of these things. Once you've got narrative, it's easier for the students to see the patterns in information. So we provide lesson plans and graphic organizers, writing supports. This is for information note-taking right here. So you can teach students to identify the main idea, key supporting details, and so on. There are activities for those lessons that call for Champs checks. So retelling and peer tutoring information from a passage that was read or that they listened to, right? And this would be an example of materials that were used for that lesson plan. And then last but not least, we've got take-home activities for family members that go with every single story that we work on. So 24 stories at levels A and B. You're able to send a copy home that tells the family, hey, it's almost adult homework. I tell students, have your parent caregiver or even like a sibling go ahead and you tell the story to them. You tell them what the icons mean, and then you're going to tell them a story about a time that something like that happened to you, right? So that's the student, they're the teacher in this scenario. Nothing comes back to school, right? And then we've got the word journals, writing organizers that can be definitely given to interventionists or therapists and other outpatient settings. Now, on a side note, I do want to throw this in here because it is free. So how do we know if Story Champs is working as an intervention? Do I need to increase the dosage, decrease? How do I even know how many sessions, and should it be a small group or one-to-one? Well, you can get all of that information using the Cubed assessment. Here it is. You go to our website. You can even just put Cubed 3 in Google and put Language Dynamics Group, and you're going to get access to the free download. This information that you put in here goes to me in case we have updates, and we do. The 3rd revision just came out in 2023, and we are about to create progress monitoring forms and publish those in the next year or 2 for grades 4 through 8. But there are benchmarks and progress monitoring forms for preschool all the way up through 3rd grade, 16 alternate forms for progress monitoring. So those are already there, and the stories that you would provide to students would reflect closely to Story Champ stories. So this kind of measure is very sensitive enough to detect change so that you do see progress. And then that leaves us right here. So in a nutshell, this is Story Champs. This is the intervention. We have tons and tons of recorded webinars that we posted to our YouTube page over the years at Language Dynamics. We have an Instagram page. You can sign up for upcoming webinars just to learn about language comprehension. Nothing requires you to have purchased Story Champs at all. Our job is to disseminate the research that goes behind the use of oral narrative language intervention to get students to gain skills that are both academically and then also socially and then personally meaningful. We also have a Facebook group for Story Champs users around the world, so you can kind of interact or see what questions that people have had. And then last but not least, this is my contact information. If you have any questions, you want me to send you the links to the videos that had low audio in them, be more than happy to answer any questions as well about how much does a kit cost, and do we get discounts if we do bulk orders, and so on and so forth, training, that kind of thing. More than happy to help you through any of that. So yeah, that is it for me. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. We really appreciate all the information. I'm going to stop recording now. For those of you who are live, if you'd like to stay on and ask Megan any questions, you're more than welcome to do that in the chat, or I can take you off of mute. Otherwise, thank you so very much for coming. For those of you who are watching this as a recording, we appreciate your time. And all of these will be mailed out as soon as they are ready. Thank you again, Megan.
Wonderful.